Hello everyone, welcome to this tutorial on Cinema 4D's environment tools. In this video I will demonstrate the basic functions of the floor, sky, environment, foreground, background, and stage objects. This is Pete Maric with Triplet 3D. Alright, let's get into Cinema 4D and I'll show you how these tools work. So the first thing is you can find your environment tools up here in the main menu. So let me just show you the difference between what the floor does. So right now if we take a render, we obviously get a black render. So if I put a floor in, what that's going to do is it's going to give us a floor object all the way to the horizon line. The floor object is a lot different than using a plane. So sometimes you want to use a plane object for a floor, but what's going to happen in this situation is you're going to see the edges of your plane. So the foreground object, if you want your floor to extend all the way to the horizon is indicated by this line right here going across the screen. So this floor is going to go all the way to that horizon line. So if I take a render, you can see that floor extends all the way to the horizon. So that's the difference between the floor and a plane object. Alright. So I want to show you the environment tool as well. So let's just go in here. What I did was I just created a really simple scene with a floor. I used a cloner for the spheres and just clone those in a radial fashion. I put a light in here. So right now, let's just take a render. Here's what my image looks like. Go back to my view, and I'm going to create an environment object. Okay, so what this allows me to do is we can establish an environment color. So right now it's white. Let's take a render. Let's see what that does. Doesn't really change things too much. So I'm going to take this and I'll just pick some sort of orange color, and I'll increase the strength of my environment. And that'll let you see what this environment color does. So right now, that's changing the look of my spheres. And what I used for the sphere object, as far as the material goes, is just a white color. I put some reflection on there, and that's pretty much that. Okay, so back to the environment. So I added this environment color, and the other thing that the environment object is going to allow us to do is add fog to our scene. Okay, so I bumped up this environment to 80%. Here's what it looks like so far. Now I'm going to add fog. And by default, the fog color is going to be white and the strength will be set to 100. So if I take another render, here's what that looks like. But we have other options as well. We could change this color. So let's just pick a sort of complementary color to the orange that we picked for the environment. So I'll pick a bluish type of color for the fog. Take another render. And here's what we're getting so far. And we can control the strength of our fog. So if I bring that down, here's what that looks like. And also we can control the distance. So let's just bump the strength back up to 100. Take another test render. Here's where we're at. So if I control this distance, here's what's going to happen. The fog will get closer to the camera. So if I take this distance down, let's just type in like 2000 and take another render. See, now the fog is getting closer to us. Alright, let's just take this down to 1000. Now we're getting a super foggy scene. It's probably not a realistic fog color, but it's just for the sake of this demo, you get the idea. So that's the basic function of the environment tools, of the environment tool. Just bring the strength down. I can bring this environment color back up. Another thing that you could do with the fog is you can actually animate the distance. So if you started this distance at like 700 or so inches, it's going to start covering up a lot of the spheres that we created. And then we can type in a number like 4000. And that parameter can be animated as well. So now we're getting a little bit of a clearer picture. Maybe that's a little bit too extreme. So if I type in 3000 here, what about 2500? Now take another render. So here's the difference between the last two. Here's really close, here's really far away. So you can get some really nice effects using this fog. Pretty cool feature in Cinema 4D. The next thing that I want to show you is the foreground object. Alright. So I just created a really simple scene here. I have a floor, I have a cube, and I cloned it in a radial fashion, put a light in there, and added some shadows. So here's our scene so far. right? This is the basic scene, and the way what the foreground object does, it allows you to put your logo on here, so your logo will be on every rendering that you do. So to do that, let me just show you what I did here. So here's what I did. I created this document, and I just put my logo in the right hand corner, and the rest is black. So black and white, that's what we're looking for. Alright, I created this document, and the image size is 800 by 450. So now I want to go into my render settings and make sure I have the right aspect ratio. So my output width is 800 by 450. Alright, so those two documents match. Now we want to go into our materials, create a new material, and I'll just call this logo. And where it says alpha, we want to check alpha, and we want to import an image into here. So I'm going to locate my image that I created, and then at this point I'm going to take this and drop it right on our foreground object. Let's take a render, and you see our logo shows up right in the bottom right hand side of the screen. Alright. Another thing that this could be used for is if you wanted to watermark your images. So I'm just going to delete this texture off of my foreground object, and I'm going to double click to create a new texture in the materials palette. Double click this, and I'll just call this watermark. So what I did in Photoshop was I created another document that would be used for our watermark image, and it looks like this. Alright, that's the image that we're going to import into Cinema 4D. So if I double click my watermark material, and I go into my alpha channel, uncheck specular, and I'll load that image into there. And just make this a plane, and I'll take this watermark image and I'll drop it right on our foreground. Now when I take a render, I get a watermark on my on the center of the rendering. You might want to control the transparency of this watermark, so if you just double click this image and you apply transparency, maybe we could take that down to 70-some%. Let's take another render, and that'll bring our watermark image transparency down a little bit. So I could probably even turn that down, turn the transparency up a little bit more, and then that way it's a little bit more transparent. So that's a nice little way to watermark your images if you do that. That's the foreground object. Now what I want to show you is the background object. What this does is it allows you to take an image, it allows you to take a photograph or some sort of drawing or whatever you want, and apply it to the background of your scene. So if I double click, and I'll just call this photo, what we want to do in the color channel is we want to import a photograph. So here's a photograph that I have laying around on my computer. There we go, and we want to uncheck specular. Alright, so we want to take this photo and we'll just drop it right on our background image. Alright, so this is a little bit skewed, our photograph. One of the things when you're using a background image is you definitely want to go through your render settings should match this aspect ratio, the resolution of your photograph. Alright, so right here we have 3504 by 2336. We'll go into our render settings and we'll unlock the aspect ratio, and we'll just type in these numbers, 3504, and heights will be 2336. We can lock that aspect ratio, and rendering test purposes we can just bring this number down to 500. That'll change the height accordingly. So now when we take a render, that looks a little bit more, that looks actually how the photograph was shot. So that's the background object. Another thing that you can use the background object for is seamless textures. So if you wanted to have just one color on the background, you can create a new material, and in the color we can create a gradient. And we'll just choose a circular gradient, and for the inside let's choose white. For the outside, just choose like a bluish grayish color, something like that. Maybe we can bring that down a little bit more, something like that, so it's not as dramatic. And we could take this color, let's make it a plane, the preview, and we could drop that on our background. Now when we take a render, this is what we'll get, a seamless background. Alright, so those are the two uses of the background object. I want to show you how the stage object works. Alright, so I go into here, I created a really basic scene, and at this point what I want to do is I want to create a few cameras, and then I'll use the stage object to animate those cameras coming in on different parts of the animation. So let's just create one camera, and we'll look through this camera, and let's just animate this. So I'm going to take this camera, and looking through the camera, here's what we're doing. Just select this little button right here, right next to the camera. So that means we're looking through the camera. And then I'm going to add a keyframe for frame 0. I'm going to move over to the timeline at frame 30, and I'm just going to zoom in, something like this, add another keyframe. So here's what our animation looks like so far. Now I want to add a second camera to the scene, and I'm going to rotate, oops. First I'm going to turn off this first camera so we can't see it in the render in the viewport. And then I'm going to create a second camera. I'm going to rotate around this. I create a second camera. I'll look through this one. And I'm going to animate this as well from frame, let's say 30. Here's my first keyframe to frame 60. We're going to zoom in like this. Okay, so there's my second camera animation, and I want to create a third camera. So I will get out of this camera, I'll hide it in the viewport, and I'll create a third camera right here. I'll look through this third camera, keyframe frame 60, keyframe frame 90, oops, let's jump over to frame 90 first, and then I'll keyframe this, just like that. And I'm not really paying attention too much to, composition or how I'm framing the scene. I'm just trying to demonstrate how this stage object works. Okay, so I'll get out of this camera, and I'll hide it in the viewport, and I'll create a stage object. Alright, so the way the stage object works is you want to drag your timeline to the keyframe that you want your first camera to start. So I have my keyframe at 0, and I want to take my first camera, and I want to drop it right into where this stage object is camera. Alright, and I'm going to hold down Control and click this little button next to where it says camera. Alright, I will jump over to frame 30, and then I'm going to take my camera 2, and I'll drop it in here, and then I'll hold down Control and click this little button right next to the camera, and then I'll go down to frame 60, take my third camera, drop it into this camera window, and hold down Control and click this little button. So here's what our animation looks like. Frame 0 to 30 we're on camera 1, 30 to 60 we're on camera 2, and 60 to 90 we're on camera 3. So I'll just play that. So that's what the stage object does. It allows you to switch between different cameras. Alright, now I want to get to the sky objects. So here's our basic sky object, and what that's going to do, actually let me just undo this, I'm going to create it right in here. So here's our basic sky object. What that's going to do, it's going to give us some basic lighting. The sky object in and of itself, it doesn't have any textures or clouds on there, so you would have to go into your materials manager, create a new material, and put a new color on here, let's say gradients, and we'll take this gradient, change it to 2D-V, pick a dark blue color for the bottom, maybe add another color over here for like an orange, just leave the top white, drag this right on our sky. So that's going to start giving us some color on our sky. So pretty much you would have to go through and either put an HDRI image on this. So if I go to my content browser, we could find an HDRI image in here. So let's just pick one real quick. So we can either make our own custom gradient on our sky object, or we could drop in an HDRI image on the sky. So now when we take a test render, we're actually going to get some photographic information off of this HDRI image, and that's good for you to create reflections on geometry or to create a nice background. Alright, so that's the sky object. Pretty straightforward. The physical sky is the one that really gets has a lot of options in here. So when you create a physical sky, you can also find a bunch of physical skies in the content browser as well. So if we go into here, so these sky presets, there's a whole bunch of skies in here that you could pick from. There's different weather. So these are all physical skies in here. So that's the one way that you could create a physical sky. If you're creating it manually, you would create it out of these environment tools. So right now, just take a render. So here's what our sky looks like so far. We don't have any clouds in here. Just rotate it around a little bit. So with our physical sky selected, we can go ahead and add some clouds. So that's going to automatically generate some two-dimensional clouds that we can't actually fly through, but are decent for like background images and stuff. The other thing that we could do is we can create volumetric clouds. All right, over here in the environment tools, we could find a cloud tool, cloud groups, and another cloud object. The way that we can make clouds in our physical sky is we can use the cloud tool. That's one way. But the first thing that we need to do is we need to enable volumetric clouds right here. So we check this, and then with the cloud tool selected, what we need to do is we'll point up looking at the sky, and we'll start painting some clouds in here. All right, and that's going to give us this big mass of clouds. So now when we take a render, so that's okay, so that's one way to create clouds. And what you can do is you could take this cloud tool, and you can control how high it is. If you hit override group right here in the attributes manager, you can control the altitude, and you can control the cloud type. This one looks really good, the second one in the list. So if we take another render, here's what this looks like. Looks pretty decent, and you can create a huge you can create some clusters of clouds. If you just hold down control and duplicate this, you can move this over. You can rotate the second cloud formation. Hold down control, click and drag to create another duplicate, and we can rotate that around. So now when I take a render, I get a whole bunch of clouds. They're volumetric clouds, which means that we can actually go through and we can fly through these clouds if we wanted to animate this. So here's another test render of this cloud, and then I'm going to show you a different way to create volumetric clouds. So these are already looking really good. They're looking really realistic. Cinema 4D tools are pretty powerful. So that's the one way to create clouds, is with the cloud tool. Again, what you need to do is in physical sky, make sure volumetric clouds are checked, and then with your cloud tool, paint a whole patch of clouds, and then you have your volumetric clouds. So here's a second way of creating clouds. If we create a cloud group, a cloud, we'll just use that object, and then I'm going to create a sphere. I'll zoom into the sphere, and I'll make it bigger. Something like that. And I want to make the sphere editable. All right, now I want to make sure that the sphere and the cloud are centered on one another. So I'm going to go to Tools, Arrange Objects, Transfer, and right here where it says Transfer To, I want to transfer it to the cloud and hit Apply. All right, now with my sphere selected, I can go up to Mesh. Well, first I want to be in my point mode. So remember, we made our sphere editable, and now we're in our point mode. So let's go up to Mesh, Commands, Set Point Value. We want to change this first option where it says Leave to Crumple Radial, and I'm going to increase this parameter right here, hit Apply, and that's going to give me this really weird shape. And right now I want to take the sphere and I want to make it a child of the cloud. Okay? So right now, when we take a render, we're not going to see anything. And the reason is that this cloud needs to be a child of the physical sky. All right? So right now, it's looking like our sphere is really tiny. So I zoom in, and I'll take another render, and our cloud is looking super, super small. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sphere, go into my scale tool, and I'm just going to scale this up. and I'll scale it down a little bit. I'll take another render, and there's our cloud so far. I can make it a little bit bigger. The other thing is I can take my cloud, and you'll see we'll get these little points right here in our cloud tool, so we can actually increase the size of this cloud. And then I can go back to my sphere, increase the size of that. That'll give me a bigger cloud. If you see that it's cutting off a little bit on the bottom, you'll need to go back and resize your cloud tool again. So I'll just take this cloud tool and I'll just bring it up a little bit. Take another render. It's looking pretty good. So at this point we can also duplicate this cloud. So this will make a cloud cluster. So I'll hold down Control, click and drag to make a duplicate, and I can move this over to create a second cloud. I can go into this cloud and click Override Group, change the altitude of this by clicking and dragging up or typing in a number. And then I can rotate this around. And this is going to give me really nice volumetric clouds. So if you need to create an animation where you're flying through clouds, this is one way to do it. And already these are looking pretty decent. So again, Cinema 4D's tools are pretty amazing. So it'll allow us to create some really nice looking clouds. Take another render, and here's where we're at so far. So you can just keep duplicating these and creating more clouds. And also you can use any type of parametric primitive, but just make sure that you make it editable before you make it a child of the cloud. This is Pete Maric with Triplet 3D. Hope you enjoyed this lesson. Thanks for watching.